The lawyer cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the massive, silent room. All eyes were on him. Two young men, dressed in suits that cost more than a car, leaned forward, their faces tight with greed. They thought they knew what was coming. They had waited their whole lives for this moment. But when the lawyer spoke the first words of the old man's final will, a gasp filled the air. It wasn't a gasp of joy. It was a sound of pure shock, of disbelief. Their smiles vanished, replaced by pale, confused masks. What could the old man have possibly written down to cause such a reaction? To understand the earthquake that was about to shake their world, we have to go back. We have to understand the man everyone laughed at, the man whose only true friend had 4 legs and a floppy set of ears. His name was Arthur Harrison. At 87 years old, he was one of the richest men in the world. He owned skyscrapers that touched the clouds and companies that ran the globe. His name was whispered in boardrooms with fear and respect. But the man himself was a ghost. He lived in a mansion so big you could get lost in it, with marble floors that were always cold and ceilings so high they seemed to swallow all sound. Arthur was completely, utterly alone. He had no wife, no children, and the family he did have, he kept far away. In a house with 50 empty rooms, he used only 2, his bedroom and the small library where he spent his days. A king in a silent castle, with no one to share his kingdom with. Well, almost no one. There was Bartholomew. Bartholomew wasn't a business partner or a butler. He was a basset hound with long, droopy ears and the saddest eyes you had ever seen. While the world saw Arthur Harrison as a powerful tycoon, Bartholomew saw something different. He saw a kind old man who saved the best part of his steak for him. He saw a gentle hand that would scratch behind his ears for hours while they watched the rain fall outside the giant windows. Bartholomew never asked for money. He never wanted a bigger share of the company. He just wanted to be by Arthur's side, his warm body a constant comfort against the old man's leg. For Arthur, this simple, honest love was worth more than all the gold in his vaults. It's a lonely feeling, isn't it? To be surrounded by things but not by love. If you've ever known what it feels like to need a true friend, or if you believe that the love of an animal can sometimes be the purest thing in the world, please, I'm asking you to join our family here. A simple click on that subscribe button helps us share more stories that matter, stories about the heart. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to us. And before we continue, take a second to comment where you're watching from. In this big, noisy world, seeing your city, your town, your country, reminds us that we are all connected in this moment. May a special kind of peace find its way to you and your family for doing so. One afternoon, that fragile peace was broken. 2 shiny black cars crunched up the gravel driveway. Out stepped Julian and Marcus, Arthur's only nephews. They wore sharp suits and even sharper smiles. But their eyes were cold. They didn't see an uncle who needed company. They saw a treasure chest that was taking too long to open. "Uncle Arthur," Julian said, his voice smooth like oil. "We were just in the neighborhood. Thought we'd see how you are." Arthur looked at them, then down at Bartholomew, who let out a low growl. The old man knew exactly why they were there. He looked up, his own eyes as sharp as ever, and said quietly, "The vultures only circle when they think the meal is almost ready." The nephews just laughed, but the words hung in the air, cold and heavy. They tried to make conversation, but it was all about money. "We've been looking at the quarterly reports, Uncle." "Impressive growth," Marcus would say, trying to sound helpful. But Arthur wasn't listening. He was carefully cutting a piece of roasted chicken from his own plate. He placed it gently on a small porcelain dish and set it on the floor for Bartholomew, who wagged his tail with joy. The nephews exchanged a look of pure disgust. All this wealth, all this power, and the old man was more focused on feeding his dog than on securing their future. They could not understand it. They saw the dog as a stupid, smelly animal, a distraction. They failed to see that the old man was showing them exactly what he valued, loyalty that couldn't be bought. Later that night, long after his nephews had left, a sliver of light could be seen from under the library door. Arthur wasn't reading business papers. He was holding a small, faded black and white photograph. It was a picture of a young woman with a kind smile, holding a small puppy. A A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek and fell onto the old photo. He opened a large leather-bound book on his desk, his will, and with a shaking hand, he crossed out a line and wrote something new beside it. The world didn't know the story behind that photograph, the story of a great love and a heartbreaking loss that had taught him who to trust. That one small change he made with his pen would soon change everything. The world outside the mansion walls had already made up its mind about Arthur Harrison. Newspapers called him the lonesome tycoon. Financial magazines wrote articles about the eccentric billionaire. People in high society would whisper and laugh at fancy parties. "Can you believe it?" they'd say. "He has all that money, and his only friend is a dog." They mocked him because they couldn't understand him. To them, a life without lavish parties, fake friends, and public attention was a wasted life. They laughed at the thought of a man preferring the silent company of a dog over their own. Their laughter was a cruel echo in the empty halls of his life, but Arthur didn't care. He was preparing to have the last laugh. As the weeks turned into months, Arthur grew weaker. The doctors came and went, shaking their heads. His nephews visited more often, their fake concern becoming thinner each time. One evening, the nurse saw him leaning close to Bartholomew, who had his head resting on the old man's lap. Arthur whispered something into the dog's long, soft ear. The nurse couldn't hear it all, but she caught a few strange words. "They will never understand," the old man breathed. "But you do. You will be the king of this empty castle." The nurse smiled sadly, thinking it was just the confusing talk of a very sick man. She had no idea how real, how literal, those words would soon become. She dismissed a prophecy that was about to come true. Then came the final night. A storm raged outside, but inside the mansion, there was a strange calm. Arthur Harrison, with a sudden burst of strength no one thought he had left, did something unexpected. He picked up the phone and made one last call. "Get him here now," he demanded, "and tell him to bring the papers." An hour later, his lawyer, a man named Mr. Gable, rushed into the mansion, his face grim. The door to the library was closed, and Arthur gave a strict order that no one was to disturb them. For 2 hours, the nephews paced outside, hearing only the low murmur of voices. When Mr. Gable finally walked out, his face was white as a sheet. He looked at the nephews, then looked away, unable to meet their eyes. He left without a word. The very next morning, the great Arthur Harrison was gone. What was said in that secret 2-hour meeting? What final, shocking instruction did the old billionaire give that left his own lawyer speechless and shaken to his very core? The answer would not just be found in his will, it would become a legend. Please, don't miss what happens next. The story of what was written on that piece of paper is something you have to see to believe. If you are not subscribed, now is the time. We need you to be with us for the rest of this incredible journey. Julian and Marcus were two sides of the same coin. Julian, the older one, had a smile that could charm a snake and a voice as smooth as honey. He was the face of their ambition. Marcus was the brain. He was quiet, his eyes always calculating, his mind always counting numbers. As they drove away from their uncle's mansion that last time, they didn't speak of his failing health. They spoke of the empire they were about to inherit. "The first thing we do is sell the oil shares," Marcus said, not even looking at the grand house in the rearview mirror. "Then we liquidate the smaller assets." Julian just nodded, already imagining his face on the cover of magazines. They were not nephews planning for a loss. They were princes waiting for the old king to finally fall. They had been this way since they were children. Arthur had once tried to connect with them. For their 10th birthday, he didn't give them money or toys. He gave them a puppy, a small golden retriever. He told them, if you learn to love something that loves you back for no reason, you will understand what is important. But their parents had been furious. They had returned the puppy the next day. "The boys don't have time for animals," their mother had sneered. "They need to focus on their studies, to be ready to take over one day." The lesson was clear. Love was a waste of time. Money was the only thing that mattered. And this lesson had poisoned their hearts ever since. The news of Arthur's death reached them by phone. There were no tears. Julian's first call was to a tailor to order the most expensive black suits. Marcus's first call was to a lawyer to ask how quickly the will could be read. 2 days later, they stood in the tailor shop, surrounded by fine fabrics. "Do you think the old man was really happy?" Julian asked, adjusting his new suit in the mirror. "All that money and only a dog for a friend. It's pathetic." Marcus didn't even look up from his phone, where he was tracking the stock market. "Who cares if he was happy?" he replied coldly. "He was rich. And now we will be too." Their lack of sadness was a cold, sharp thing in the quiet shop. Their mother, Eleanor, called them that evening. Her voice was a whip crack over the phone. "Remember what you have to do," she warned. "You must look sad. You must cry if you can. The world will be watching." She reminded them to be perfect images of grieving nephews. Then, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "And don't forget the promise he made to me all those years ago, after your father passed. He swore that you boys would be looked after, that everything he had would one day be yours." But did Arthur remember that promise the same way she did? Or had the long, lonely years with only Bartholomew for company changed his mind about what he truly owed his family? At the funeral, Julian played his part perfectly. He stood before the crowd of business leaders and distant relatives, his face a mask of sorrow. He even dabbed his eye with a handkerchief. He spoke of Arthur's vision and brilliant mind. But as he looked out at the sea of faces, his mind was far away. He wasn't thinking about his dead uncle. He was thinking about how all these important people would soon be answering to him. He was performing, and this was his first act as the new king. He was so good at pretending that he almost believed it himself. But a lie, no matter how well told, is still a lie. And the truth was waiting patiently in a sealed envelope. Back at the mansion for the reception, the air was thick with quiet chatter and the smell of expensive flowers. Marcus slipped away from the crowd. He walked through the giant halls, not seeing memories of his uncle, but seeing empty spaces to fill with his own things. He entered the library, the heart of Arthur's lonely world. There, curled up on the old man's worn leather armchair, was Bartholomew. The dog looked up with his sad, drooping eyes, and let out a soft whine. Marcus just stared, a cruel smirk on his face. He leaned down close to the dog's head, and instead of petting him, he whispered, "Your free ride is over, you smelly mutt. You'll be in the pound by next week." Bartholomew flinched as if he had been struck. Julian found Marcus a few minutes later, holding something small and dark in his hand. "Look what I found in his desk drawer," Julian said, his voice buzzing with excitement. It was a small, old wooden box, intricately carved, with a heavy lock. It was too small for papers, but too heavy to be empty. They shook it but heard nothing. It was a complete mystery. This had to be it. The final prize. Perhaps it held the keys to a secret Swiss bank account or the location of a hidden safe. This little box, they were sure of it, was the key to unlocking a level of wealth they hadn't even dared to dream of. But how could they open it? They examined the lock. It was unlike any they had ever seen, shaped like a small, strange flower. There was no key in the desk or anywhere in the library. They became obsessed. For the rest of the reception, they could think of nothing else. All the money, all the companies, it was all promised to them. But this box represented something more, a secret, a final piece of their uncle's hidden life. They decided they would have to wait. Surely, the lawyer would give them the key during the reading of the will tomorrow. Their minds swirled with possibilities, each one grander than the last. Their greed was a fire, and the little box was the fuel. That night, they went to the most expensive restaurant in the city. They ordered champagne and lobster, a celebration of their new lives. "To us," Julian toasted, raising his glass. "To finally getting what we deserve." They laughed loudly, their voices echoing in the quiet restaurant. They laughed at their eccentric uncle and his ridiculous dog. They planned their futures, spending money they did not yet have, feeling like gods among men. They were so blinded by their own reflections in their champagne glasses that they couldn't see the cliff they were about to run off at full speed. They were celebrating a victory that had already been lost. But miles away, in the dark and silent mansion, a different story was unfolding. The house was no longer just empty, it felt heartbroken. Bartholomew, the old, sad-eyed dog, limped down the grand staircase. He didn't go to the kitchen for food or to his soft bed. He walked straight to a portrait of Arthur that hung in the main hall. He sat down beneath it, lifted his head, and let out a howl. It was a sound so full of pain and loneliness it could break your heart. But was it just a cry of sadness? Or did the loyal dog know something the celebrating nephews didn't? He was guarding a secret of his own, a secret about a small, flower-shaped key his master had placed on his collar just days before he passed. The day of the will reading arrived with a cold, bright sun that did nothing to warm the air. Julian and Marcus walked into the lawyer's grand office like they owned it already. They nodded at the stern-faced lawyer, Mr. Gable, their smiles wide and confident. They were just minutes away from the biggest payday of their lives. Mr. Gable, however, did not smile back. His face was a stone mask, and his eyes seemed to look right through them. He knew the contents of the envelope on his desk. He knew it wasn't a document of inheritance, it was a stick of dynamite, and he was about to light the fuse. To understand the explosion that was coming, you have to understand the love that built it. It all started on a rainy Tuesday, 10 years ago. Arthur had been driving home, a lonely man in a big car, when he passed a small animal shelter. On a whim, he stopped. In a cage full of yapping, jumping puppies, one sat completely still in the back. It was a basset hound with ears too long for his body and eyes that held all the sadness in the world. The sign on his cage read, "Bartholomew wanted." Arthur felt a strange connection. He too felt unwanted. That day he didn't just rescue a dog, he rescued a piece of himself. He brought the sad-eyed puppy home to a mansion, and in that huge, empty house, two lonely souls found each other. Their friendship was built in quiet moments. While the world of business buzzed with Arthur's name, his own world had become very small and very simple. He would read his newspaper in the library, and Bartholomew would sleep on his feet, his soft snores a gentle rhythm in the silent room. At dinner, Arthur would have the chef prepare a small, plain steak for Bartholomew, placing the plate on the floor next to his own chair. He spoke to the dog constantly. "They want to build another tower in the city, Bartholomew," he'd say. "But what's the point of touching the sky if your feet are not on solid ground?" The dog would just thump his tail, offering a loyalty that no human ever had. Arthur had not always been so distrusting of people. There was a time he believed in promises. Once, years ago, he called his nephews to his office. He told them a lie. He said a bad investment had gone wrong and that he had lost nearly half of his fortune. He watched them closely, hoping to see concern for him, the man. Instead, he saw panic in their eyes, panic for their lost inheritance. Julian had turned pale, while Marcus immediately started talking about ways to recover the assets. They never once asked if he was okay. But that evening, as Arthur sat staring into the fire, Bartholomew came and rested his heavy head on his knee, as if to say, "I am still here. I do not care about the money." The real reason for Arthur's loneliness, the secret he never shared, was locked away in an old photograph he kept by his bed. It was a picture of a smiling young woman named Lily, his first and only love. She had died in a car crash almost 60 years ago. In her arms in the photo was a small puppy. His name had also been Bartholomew. She had given him to Arthur the week before she died. "He will keep your heart safe," she had told him. But after losing them both, Arthur had locked his heart away, afraid to ever let anyone that close again. Until he found a sad-eyed dog in a shelter who looked just like the friend he had lost so long ago. He had built his entire empire on a promise he made to Lily's memory. He promised that he would never again value things over love. He promised he would build a world for himself where loyalty was the only currency that mattered. For decades, he had tested everyone around him, including his own family. He gave them chances to show they cared for the man, not the money. And for decades, they had failed every single test. They never understood that his true wealth wasn't in his bank accounts. It was in the simple, unwavering affection of a dog who asked for nothing and gave everything. His will wasn't just a document. It was the final chapter of a love story that had started 60 years ago. In his final days, the nurses saw him doing something strange. He was showing Bartholomew pictures in an old photo album. They were pictures of Lily. This was her, he whispered, his voice weak as he pointed to the smiling woman. She would have loved you so much. Then he took a small, flower-shaped key from a chain around his own neck, a key he had worn since he was a young man. He carefully attached it to Bartholomew's collar. You keep this safe for me, he said. It unlocks the only thing that ever truly mattered. What treasure did that key protect? And why would he entrust it to a dog? The answer was a secret that would soon turn the world of two greedy nephews completely upside down. Back in the lawyer's office, Mr. Gable felt a deep sense of duty. He remembered Arthur's last words to him in that 2-hour meeting. They will call me crazy, Gable, the old man had said, his eyes clear and sharp. Let them. True love is always seen as madness by those who have never felt it. Just read it exactly as it is written. Mr. Gable had given his word. He looked at the smug faces of Julian and Marcus, and for a moment he almost felt pity for them. They were about to learn a lesson that all of their expensive schools and business degrees could never have taught them. They were about to learn the difference between price and value. As Julian and Marcus settled into their plush leather chairs, they noticed something they hadn't seen before. Lying on a small rug by Mr. Gable's desk was Bartholomew. The dog was silent, his sad eyes watching them. What is that thing doing in here? Marcus snapped, pointing at the dog with disgust. Mr. Gable's face hardened. Mr. Harrison was very specific, the lawyer said, his voice cold as ice. He requested that his most trusted friend be present. The nephews just rolled their eyes, sharing a smirk. They were so close to their prize, they didn't care about the final wishes of a crazy old man. They didn't notice the strange, flower-shaped key hanging from the dog's collar. The room fell silent. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, each tick a countdown to the explosion. Mr. Gable put on his reading glasses and slowly, deliberately, broke the wax seal on the large envelope. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. Julian leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Marcus held his breath. This was it. The moment their lives would change forever. Mr. Gable looked up from the page, his eyes meeting theirs for one final, heavy moment. He cleared his throat. I, Arthur Harrison, he began to read, his voice steady and clear, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. He paused, taking a deep breath before reading the very next line. A line that would make the world stop spinning. Mr. Gable looked over his glasses at the two greedy faces in front of him. The air in the room was so thick with expectation you could cut it with a knife. He continued to read. First, to my loyal cook, Mrs. Gable, for her 30 years of service and for always remembering to make my soup without salt, I leave the sum of $50,000. Julian and Marcus looked at each other, a flash of annoyance in their eyes. $50,000? To a cook? It was a drop in the ocean of their uncle's fortune, but it still felt like a waste. It was their money she was getting. They shifted in their seats, eager for the lawyer to get past these small gifts and onto the main event, the billions that belonged to them. The lawyer turned a page. To my gardener, Mr. Henderson, who spoke more to his roses than he did to people, but who created beauty in a lonely place, I also leave $50,000. Now Marcus couldn't stay quiet. Is he going to list every servant in the house? He muttered to Julian. This could take all day. Mr. Gable stopped reading and looked at him with cold eyes. Every word in this document was chosen by your uncle for a reason. I suggest you listen. The nephews fell silent, but their impatience was growing, a hot, angry feeling in their chests. They saw these gifts not as acts of kindness, but as insults. The old man was giving their inheritance away to the staff. Then came the part about their mother. To my sister, Eleanor, the lawyer read, I leave the small wooden box from my desk. Julian and Marcus shot up in their chairs. The box. The one with the strange lock. And the key. Julian demanded. Mr. Gable continued reading, his voice flat. She will find the key where my heart always was. I also leave her a lifetime subscription to a magazine on gardening, in the hopes that she might learn that patience and care are needed to make anything beautiful grow. It was a slap in the face. A box without a key and a gardening magazine. Their mother, who was expecting millions, would be furious. What did he mean, where my heart always was? The mystery was only getting deeper. Finally, the lawyer arrived at the section they had been waiting for. Regarding the entirety of my remaining estate, he read slowly, including all shares in Harrison Industries, all properties, all liquid assets, and all personal belongings, I have a single condition for my beloved nephews, Julian and Marcus. The two men leaned in so far they were almost falling out of their chairs. Their hearts hammered against their ribs. A condition? That was fine. They would do anything. Sign any paper. Make any promise. They were about to become the richest men of their generation. They just needed to hear the price. They had no idea the price was not about money, but about something they had never learned to value. Mr. Gable paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost painful. Then he read the words that shattered their dreams. My nephews will inherit my entire fortune on one condition, that for 1 full year, they personally care for my dearest friend, Bartholomew. They must move into my mansion and live there together. They must feed him, walk him, and bathe him themselves. No servants may help them with this task. He must be treated with the kindness and respect he has always shown me. For a second, there was only stunned silence. Then, Julian let out a laugh, a sharp, ugly sound. You can't be serious, he spat. That's not a will. That's a joke. The color had drained from Marcus's face. This was worse than a joke. It was a nightmare. A whole year of their lives wasted on being dog-sitters for a smelly hound? It was humiliating. It was insane. The old man was senile. Marcus shouted, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly on the wooden floor. He was out of his mind. This will not stand up in court. Mr. Gable did not flinch. He simply replied, Your uncle had 2 different doctors confirm he was of perfectly sound mind on the day he signed this. It is perfectly legal. The choice is yours. Accept the condition or refuse it. He made it sound so simple, but it was a choice between their pride and billions of dollars. Julian was pacing the room like a caged tiger. So we have to touch that thing? Let it sleep in our house? For a whole year, he said, his voice dripping with disgust. He looked over at Bartholomew, who was watching him with those sad, knowing eyes. The dog seemed to understand everything. The thought of cleaning up after the animal, of spending his precious time on such a worthless task, made his stomach turn. He was Julian Harrison, a future captain of industry, not a servant to a dog. All his life he had looked down on people who served. Now, his uncle was trying to force him into that very role. It was the ultimate insult. Then Marcus, the calculating one, saw a loophole. What if we accept? He said slowly, a sly look in his eyes. But we don't really do it. Who's going to watch us? Who will know if a mate feeds the dog instead of us? It was a clever thought, a way to trick the dead old man. But Arthur Harrison had been cleverer. Mr. Gable seemed to be waiting for this question. He turned another page and read, To ensure this condition is met, I have arranged for a live-in supervisor whose only job will be to report on my nephew's progress. Any failure to meet the conditions in letter and in spirit will be considered an immediate refusal of the terms of the will. The trap was closing around them. Julian couldn't take it anymore. His pride, his arrogance, it all boiled over. He stopped pacing and looked the lawyer dead in the eye. No, he said, his voice shaking with rage. Absolutely not. We refuse. This is insane. We will fight this in court, but we will not be humiliated like this. He felt a rush of power as he said it. He was a Harrison. He would not be brought down by the crazy demand of a dead man. He was sure the law would be on his side. He believed this was his moment of defiance, his first act as the new head of the family. He had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his entire life. Mr. Gable looked at Julian, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his stony face. It looked almost like pity. As you wish, he said softly. He then turned to the final page of the will. The will is very clear on this point, he said, his voice suddenly loud and booming in the quiet room. It says, and I quote, Should my nephews, Julian and Marcus, refuse this one simple task, a task that asks only for a small amount of kindness? The lawyer paused, letting the words hang in the air. Julian and Marcus held their breath, a new, terrible feeling of dread washing over them. What could be worse than losing the inheritance? The lawyer continued, "Then they shall receive nothing, not a single penny, and my entire fortune, without exception, will be immediately transferred into a trust fund created for the sole benefit of." He stopped again, his eyes landing on the sad-eyed dog sitting quietly on the rug. The silence in the room stretched for a heartbeat. Then, too, Julian and Marcus stared at Mr. Gable, their faces frozen in confusion. The lawyer's eyes shifted from them and settled on the quiet dog on the floor. He took a deep, final breath and finished the sentence that would echo in their minds for the rest of their lives. "My entire fortune, without exception, will be immediately transferred into a trust fund created for the sole benefit of my best and only friend, my beloved dog, Bartholomew." The words fell into the silent room like stones into a calm pond, and the ripples of shock were immediate and violent. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. It was as if time had stopped. Julian's mouth was open, but no sound came out. Marcus just blinked, his brilliant mind unable to process the information. It had to be a mistake, a misprint, a cruel, terrible joke. Then, the silence shattered. "What?" Julian's roar was an animal sound of pure rage. "You're telling us he gave everything to a dog?" He lunged forward, slamming his hands on the lawyer's desk. "That's impossible. It's illegal. We are his family, his blood." Bartholomew, startled by the shout, let out a small whimper and pressed closer to Mr. Gable's leg. Mr. Gable didn't even flinch. He calmly pushed his glasses up his nose. "On the contrary, Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice as steady as a rock. "It is perfectly legal. Your uncle spent months with a team of the best lawyers in the country to create this trust. It is ironclad. The trust will be managed by the National Animal Rescue Foundation. They will oversee Bartholomew's care for the rest of his life. He will continue to live in the mansion with a full staff dedicated to his well-being. Upon his death, the remaining fortune will be donated to build animal shelters all over the world." It was a perfect, unbreakable plan. Arthur had thought of everything. Marcus was shaking his head, a wild look in his eyes. "No, no, no," he whispered, mostly to himself. "This is a nightmare." Then his eyes widened as a thought struck him. A memory. His uncle's words about the little wooden box. "She will find the key where my heart always was." His eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything. Then he saw it. Dangling from Bartholomew's collar, catching the light, was a small, flower-shaped key. The key to the secret treasure. It wasn't a figure of speech. His uncle's heart, his treasure, was literally with the dog. "The key!" Julian yelled, following his brother's gaze. Their shared desperation created a spark between them. Maybe the fortune in the will was a trick. Maybe the real wealth, the secret fortune, was in that locked box, and the dog was just the gatekeeper. The thought filled them with a new, frantic hope. If they could just get that key, they could still win. All of their greed, their rage, and their frustration focused on that one tiny, metallic object. In that moment, the dog was no longer just an animal. It was the final obstacle standing between them and their destiny. Julian, blinded by rage and greed, did not think. He simply acted. He lunged towards Bartholomew, his hands outstretched, reaching for the collar. "Give me that key," he snarled. But before his fingers could touch the dog, Mr. Gable moved faster than they could have imagined. He stood up, placing himself directly between Julian and the terrified animal. "Do not touch my client," he boomed, his voice filled with an authority they had never heard before. Bartholomew cowered behind his legs, shaking. The lawyer wasn't just a reader of wills anymore. He was a protector. "Your client?" Marcus scoffed, though his voice trembled. "It's a dog." Mr. Gable looked at him with utter contempt. "As of 10 minutes ago," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "that dog is the beneficiary of the Harrison estate. He has more legal rights and is worth more money than you will ever see in your lifetime. I am the executor of his trust. If you so much as frighten him, I will have you arrested for harassment. Now, I suggest you leave my office." The finality in his voice was absolute. They had lost. They had lost everything, and the winner was a sad-eyed dog they had mocked just yesterday. Defeated, humiliated, they stumbled out of the office. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The secretaries in the waiting room stared at them, no longer with respect, but with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The news would be all over the world in a matter of hours. They would be laughingstocks. The two greedy nephews who were disinherited in favor of a dog. Their faces burned with shame. They walked out into the bright sunshine, but all they could feel was a deep, chilling cold. They had flown so high on their expectations, and now they had fallen so far. But what about the box? The mysterious box left to their mother. As they reached the front door of the building, a thought tormented them. It was the only thing they had left, a final puzzle piece. Did it hold a secret fortune? Was it their last hope? They had to find out what it contained. The key was around the neck of the richest dog in the world, a dog now protected by a wall of lawyers and money. It seemed impossible. They had no money, no power, and no way to get to it. How could they possibly solve their uncle's final riddle? As they stood on the pavement, completely lost, Mr. Gable's assistant came running out. "Mr. Harrison," she said, looking at Julian, "Mr. Gable forgot to give you this." She handed him a simple, sealed white envelope. On the front, in their uncle's shaky handwriting, were just 2 words, "For afterwards." It wasn't money. It was just a letter. A final message from the man they had so badly misunderstood. What could it possibly say? Was it an apology? An explanation? Or was it one final, cruel joke from beyond the grave? The contents of that letter would prove to be more explosive than the will itself. The car ride back was completely silent. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing them. Outside, the world kept moving. People were laughing, cars were honking, life was going on. But inside their expensive car, Julian and Marcus were trapped in the wreckage of their future. Marcus stared out the window, but he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing numbers in his head, billions of dollars, all turning to dust. Julian just gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with rage. Between them on the seat lay the small white envelope. It was a flimsy piece of paper, but it felt as heavy as a gravestone. It was the last word from the man who had destroyed them. They drove to a quiet park and stopped the car under the shade of a large tree. For a long time, neither of them moved. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Open it." Julian picked up the letter. His hands, which had been so steady signing business deals, were now shaking. He tore the envelope open with a single, angry rip. Inside was one sheet of paper, covered in their uncle's familiar, spidery handwriting. It wasn't a long letter, but every word was a carefully aimed arrow, and they were about to hit their mark. The letter didn't start with anger or disappointment. It started with a memory. "My dear boys," it began, "I remember a day when you were both very small. I brought home a puppy, a golden retriever full of life. You were so happy for a moment, but your parents told me you had no time for such things. They said your time was for more important lessons. I fear that was the day I began to lose you. I spent the rest of my life giving you tests, hoping you would choose connection over currency, love over ledgers. This was not a punishment. It was your final test. A chance to spend 1 year learning to care for a creature that would love you unconditionally. If you are reading this, it means you have failed." The words were not cruel, but they were devastating. They were the truth, and the truth hurt more than any insult could. The letter went on to explain about Lily, his lost love, and the first Bartholomew. He told them how that first puppy had been his only comfort in a world that had gone dark. "Bartholomew, the dog you despise," he wrote, "was my second chance to honor that memory. He never once looked at me and saw a bank account. He just saw a friend. I wanted you to feel that just once. To understand that the most valuable things in life are the ones that have no price tag." The letter was his final attempt to teach them the lesson they had refused to learn their whole lives. Then the letter spoke of the box. "The small box I left your mother does not contain what you think it does," Arthur wrote. "There are no gold coins or secret bank codes inside. I would not leave you something so simple. I have left you something far more valuable and far more dangerous. The truth. The key that Bartholomew wears opens that box, and inside you will find the one secret I kept my entire life. A secret that could have destroyed the Harrison name forever. I trust you will know what to do with it. A secret? A dangerous truth? What could be worse than losing all the money? Suddenly, the contents of that box became the most important mystery in the world. They drove to their mother's house in a daze. Eleanor was waiting for them on the porch, a triumphant smile on her face. "Well?" she demanded, her eyes glittering with greed. "Tell me everything. How many millions did I get?" Julian couldn't even speak. It was Marcus who delivered the news, his voice flat and dead. "You get a wooden box, Mother," he said, "and a magazine subscription." Eleanor's smile vanished. "What are you talking about? What about the money?" Julian finally found his voice. "It's gone," he choked out. He gave it all to the dog. The look of disbelief on their mother's face quickly turned into a storm of fury. "You fools!" she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "You utter, complete fools! You had billions of dollars in your hands, and you let it go because you were too proud to walk a dog? I raised you to be lions, and you behaved like stubborn mules. You have ruined us." She didn't comfort them. She didn't share their pain. She only felt her own loss, her own shattered dreams of a life of even greater luxury. Her anger was a mirror of their own greed, and seeing it reflected back at them so ugly and raw made them feel even smaller, even more pathetic. They weren't a family grieving. They were three partners in greed, and their business had just gone bankrupt. As she was screaming, her phone buzzed on the table. Then Julian's phone buzzed. Then Marcus's. It was a news alert sent to millions of people at the same time. The headline was simple and brutal. Billionaire tycoon Arthur Harrison leaves entire fortune to his dog. The article mentioned them by name. It called them the unlucky nephews, who had refused a simple condition. The story was out. The whole world was now laughing at them. Their private humiliation was now a public spectacle. They could already imagine the jokes, the cartoons, the endless shame. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. In the middle of his mother's rage and the world's laughter, Marcus's mind went strangely quiet. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something cold and sharp. He thought of the dog, now living in their mansion, sleeping in their beds, eating food better than they could now afford. He thought of the key around its neck. The key to a secret that could destroy the family name. A different kind of power. A different kind of weapon. He looked at his brother, who was staring blankly at the wall, crushed by shame. "The key," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "We have to get that key." Julian looked up, his eyes empty at first, then slowly, a dangerous spark ignited in their depths. The humiliation had burned away his pride, leaving only a desperate, dark resolve. He had been a prince who was about to become a king. Now he was nothing. A joke. He had nothing left to lose. "How?" Julian asked, his voice low and hard. "The mansion is a fortress now. The dog is protected. We can't get near it." Marcus's lips curled into a small, cruel smile. It was the first time he had smiled all day. "You don't walk through the front door," he said. "You find another way in. We are not going to be laughingstocks. We are going to get what is ours." Their uncle had wanted to teach them kindness. Instead, he had just taught them how to be criminals. While Julian and Marcus were drowning in shame, Bartholomew the dog was waking up to a new life. The giant, empty mansion was no longer silent. It was filled with the quiet sounds of a dedicated staff. A famous chef, once known for cooking for kings, now spent his mornings grilling the finest cuts of steak for Bartholomew's breakfast. A team of groundskeepers tended the gardens, making sure the paths were perfect for his afternoon walks. A veterinarian made house calls every single day, just to check that he was healthy and happy. Bartholomew wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a king, and the mansion was his palace, all paid for by a love that was stronger than greed. In a dark, cheap diner that smelled of burnt coffee, the two brothers huddled in a booth. They looked completely out of place in their expensive, wrinkled suits. They were ghosts haunting their own past lives. The security will be new, Julian said, his voice low and defeated. There will be cameras, guards. We'll never get in. But Marcus was different. His fall had not broken him. It had made him sharp, like a piece of glass. The new security will be on the outside, he explained, sketching on a napkin. The walls, the gates. But they won't change the house itself. I know a way in. A forgotten service tunnel in the wine cellar. We used to play in it as kids. Their mother, Eleanor, was not a source of comfort. When they told her their desperate plan, her eyes lit up with a cold, feverish fire. She did not warn them of the danger. She did not tell them to stop. Instead, she went to her jewelry box and took out a heavy gold bracelet, the last piece of expensive jewelry she owned. Sell this, she commanded, pressing it into Julian's hand. Use the money to buy what you need. Tools. Dark clothes. Do not fail me again. She was not just their mother anymore. She was a co-conspirator, pushing her sons deeper into the darkness, all for a chance to reclaim a prize she believed was stolen from her. The night of the break-in was cold and moonless, a perfect blanket of darkness. Dressed in black, Julian and Marcus looked like shadows. They cut through a section of the iron fence far from the main gate, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. Every rustle of leaves felt like an approaching guard. They were trespassing on the grounds they had once walked on as princes. This was their first crime, the first irreversible step. They were no longer just disgraced nephews. They were criminals, and there was no going back. With every step, they were becoming the monsters their uncle had always feared they were. They found the entrance to the service tunnel hidden beneath a thick curtain of ivy, just as Marcus remembered. The iron door was old and rusted, but a heavy bolt cutter from the hardware store made quick work of the lock. The air that rushed out from the tunnel was cold and smelled of damp earth and forgotten time. It was a secret passage from the past, and they were using it to try and steal their future. As they slipped one by one into the pitch-black tunnel, leaving the night behind, they had no idea what they would find waiting for them on the other side. They were so focused on the key, they never stopped to wonder if their uncle might have set one final trap. The tunnel led them directly into the vast wine cellar, as planned. The mansion was silent above them, like a sleeping giant. Using a small flashlight, they crept up the stone steps and into the main kitchen. The room was spotless, gleaming in the pale light. On a small, silver plate on the counter sat a single, perfectly cooked piece of salmon, left out to cool. It was Bartholomew's midnight snack. The sight of it filled Julian with a fresh wave of rage. That dog was eating better than they ever would again. The injustice of it all burned in his chest, pushing away his fear and leaving only a cold desire for revenge. This wasn't just about a secret anymore. It was about tearing down the world their uncle had built for his dog. They moved through the dark hallways of the mansion like ghosts. Every portrait on the wall seemed to watch them with accusing eyes. Every creak of the floorboards was a scream in the silence. They knew where the dog would be. Arthur had always let Bartholomew sleep in his bedroom. It was the one place in the house that had been filled with love. They reached the master suite at the end of the long hall, their goal just a few feet away. Marcus put his hand on the large brass doorknob, his breath held tight in his chest. Everything depended on what was behind this door. The box. The secret. Their last chance. He turned the knob slowly, praying it wouldn't make a sound. The door swung open with a soft click. The room was not completely dark. A small nightlight cast a gentle glow. There, on a luxurious velvet bed at the foot of his uncle's massive four-poster, was Bartholomew. He was curled up in a ball, fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. And there, shining in the soft light, was the flower-shaped key on his collar. It was so close they could almost taste it. They had done it. They were going to win. Their nightmare was finally about to end. Julian took a step into the room, his eyes locked on the key. He was so focused that he didn't see the shape in the corner. Marcus saw it a second too late. As Julian's foot touched the soft carpet, a lamp clicked on, flooding the room with light. "I've been expecting you, gentlemen." The voice was calm, firm, and familiar. Sitting in a large armchair, a book resting in her lap, was a woman with gray hair and stern eyes. It was the supervisor their uncle had mentioned in the will, the one who was supposed to watch them if they had taken the deal. She wasn't just a supervisor, she was a guard. They were frozen in place, caught in the beam of light like startled animals. The plan was in ruins. They were trapped. Bartholomew lifted his head, his sleepy eyes blinking in the sudden brightness. He looked at Julian and Marcus, and he did not growl. He did not bark. Instead, he slowly thumped his tail against the velvet bed, a soft, welcoming sound in the deadly silent room. The supervisor looked at the dog, then back at the two brothers, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "He is still happy to see you," she said, her voice filled with a strange pity. "But what is he happy about? Does he sense a hidden good in them, or is he just a symbol of an innocence they are about to destroy forever?" The supervisor's name was Mrs. Vance, and she had been Arthur's oldest and dearest friend, the only one who had known him before the money changed everything. She looked at the two young men, not with anger, but with a deep, weary sadness. "I knew you would come," she said, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. "Arthur knew you would come too. In fact, he was counting on it." Julian and Marcus exchanged a confused glance. How could he have known? This wasn't part of any plan they could imagine. It felt like they were ghosts, haunting a story that had been written long before they arrived, and they were just playing their parts without even knowing it. Panic seized Julian. His first instinct was to run, to bolt back down the stairs and disappear into the night. Marcus was thinking something different. He was measuring the distance between himself and the old woman, wondering if they could overpower her before she could scream or press an alarm. But Mrs. Vance just sat there, perfectly calm, which was more frightening than any threat. "Before you do something you'll regret even more than what you've already done," she said, as if reading their minds. "You should know that this was all his design. He didn't want to punish you. He wanted to save you." This made no sense. He had taken away their future, their name, their money. How was that saving them? "This whole thing," Mrs. Vance continued, gesturing around the luxurious room, "the will, the condition, your refusal, it was all a stage. Arthur knew you valued money more than anything. So he took it away. He wanted to see what you would become when you had nothing left but your own choices. He wanted to know if, at the very bottom, you would choose to be good men or just clever thieves." She was revealing a plan so complex, so deep, it was hard to comprehend. Their uncle hadn't written a will, he had written a test for their very souls. And they were standing in the middle of the final exam, with no idea how to pass. Then, something happened that no one expected. Bartholomew, who had been watching the scene with his big, sad eyes, hopped off the bed. He didn't run to Mrs. Vance for protection. Instead, he walked slowly, deliberately, across the room towards the two intruders. He stopped right in front of Julian, who was still frozen with fear and confusion. The dog looked up at him, and then he did something remarkable. He leaned forward and gently licked Julian's trembling hand. It was not the action of a guard dog protecting his treasure. It was the action of a friend, offering comfort for a sadness he could somehow sense. That simple, wet lick on his hand broke something inside Julian. He had come here as a thief, full of rage and hate for this animal. He had seen the dog as a symbol of everything he had lost. But the dog did not see him as an enemy. In that moment, Julian wasn't a disgraced heir or a criminal. He was just a sad man being comforted by a kind animal. Tears welled up in his eyes, real tears of shame and loss, not the fake ones he had practiced for the funeral. He fell to his knees, not in defeat, but in a strange kind of surrender. He slowly, hesitantly, reached out and stroked Bartholomew's long, soft ear. "Your uncle's final instruction to me was very specific," Mrs. Vance said, her voice softer now. "He told me, if they come in the night full of anger and violence, call the police and let the law handle them. But if they show even a moment of doubt, a flicker of humanity, then the choice is no longer mine to make." She looked at Julian on the floor, his hand resting on the dog's head. "He said the key doesn't just unlock a box. He said it unlocks a person's true character. He wanted to give you one last chance to choose who you really are." The weight of that choice, of his entire life, seemed to press down on Julian. Marcus watched this, his mind racing. This was not part of his plan. Emotions were messy, unpredictable. He wanted to shout at his brother to get up, to snatch the key and run. But he couldn't. He was paralyzed by the scene in front of him, by the impossible gentleness of the moment. He had always seen the world as a series of problems to be solved with logic and force. But this was something else entirely. This was a problem of the heart, and he had no idea what the right answer was. For the first time, his brilliant mind was completely silent, completely lost. Seeing the broken look on Julian's face, Mrs. Vance stood up. She walked over to the kneeling man and the peaceful dog. With a steady hand, she reached down and unclipped the small, flower-shaped key from Bartholomew's collar. The room was so quiet you could hear the tiny metallic click as it came free. She didn't offer it to Marcus, the cold planner who still stood in the shadows. She held it out in her open palm to Julian, the man on his knees. "Your uncle believed in second chances," she whispered. "He never got one. But he wanted to make sure you did. What you do with this, that will be his final answer." Julian looked at the key lying in her palm. It was so small, but it held the power to destroy a legacy. He had come for it out of greed and a desire for revenge. But now it felt different. It felt heavy. Taking it was no longer a victory, but a burden. He slowly reached out and took the key. It was cool against his skin. He and Marcus had what they came for. They had won. But standing there in the bright light of their uncle's bedroom, with a kind dog and a watchful old woman, it felt exactly like losing. They had the key to their family's greatest secret, but they had no idea what it would unlock inside of them. As they turned to leave, silent and shaken, Mrs. Vance spoke one last time, her voice a quiet, chilling warning that followed them into the dark hallway. "Remember his last words to me," she said. "He told me, that box is a mirror. Whatever they bring to it, anger or forgiveness, it will show them their own reflection magnified 1,000 times. Be very careful what you ask it to show you." They walked away from the room, not as triumphant thieves, but as two men carrying a locked box and a terrible warning. The greatest danger was not behind them. It was waiting for them, just a single turn of a key away. They didn't speak a word on the way back to their mother's house. The small, cold key felt like a lump of ice in Julian's pocket. The heavy wooden box sat on the seat between them like a silent passenger. This was not the triumphant ride they had imagined. There was no joy, no sense of victory. There was only a heavy, sinking feeling of dread. They had been given the key, not won it. And that felt infinitely worse. It felt like they had been handed a bomb, and their uncle was daring them from beyond the grave to see if they were brave, or foolish, enough to light the fuse. Their mother, Eleanor, was waiting for them by the door, pacing like a hungry cat. When she saw them, she didn't ask if they were okay. She didn't ask what had happened. Her eyes went straight to the box in Marcus's hands. "You got it," she hissed, a greedy light in her eyes. "You got the key. Open it. Quickly." She pulled them inside, her excitement a sharp, ugly contrast to their own quiet fear. She saw the box as a treasure chest. They were beginning to see it as a coffin, and they were terrified of what ghost might be lying inside. In the dim light of the living room, Julian's hands trembled as he brought the key to the lock. The flower's shape slid perfectly into place. He turned it. With a loud click that echoed in the silent room, the old lock sprang open. For a moment, they all just stared at it, holding their breath. This was it. The final secret. Julian slowly lifted the heavy lid. There were no diamonds. No gold bars. No stacks of cash. The box was filled with old, yellowed papers, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. On top of the pile lay a single folded letter, and on the front, in their uncle's handwriting, was a single word: forgive. Marcus snatched the letter and unfolded it. His eyes scanned the page, growing wider with every line. "My boys," the letter read, "the Harrison Empire, the source of all your pride and all my loneliness, was built on a lie. When I was a young man, I had a partner, a brilliant, trusting man named Thomas Gable. He was the heart of our small company. I was the brain. But I was ambitious and cruel. I used a loophole in our contract to push him out, taking everything we had built together and leaving him with nothing. He died a poor man a few years later. The entire Harrison fortune is, and has always been, stolen. Julian and Marcus looked at each other, their faces pale with shock. Gable, the lawyer, Mr. Gable, was Thomas's son. It all made sense now. The lawyer's coldness, his loyalty to Arthur's strange will. He wasn't just an employee, he was a silent judge, watching the sons of the man who ruined his father. Arthur's letter continued, I spent my life trying to outrun that guilt. Thomas's son, William, knew the truth. I made him my lawyer, and I promised him that one day I would find a way to make things right. These papers are the proof of my crime. They are the original contract, the evidence of my betrayal. The final scene of their story is a quiet one. It's a man and a dog walking through a garden as the sun sets. Julian, no longer a prince or a pauper, is just a man who found his soul. And Bartholomew, the dog who inherited a fortune, thumps his tail, happy to be with his friend. Arthur Harrison's will was never about the money. It was a search for one honest heart in a world of greed. And in the end, against all odds, he found it. The old billionaire who said his dog was his only friend left behind a legacy that proved that the greatest treasures are not locked in a vault, but are found in acts of kindness, truth, and love. This story is about the choices we make when we think no one is watching. It's about the truth that lives inside all of us. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that it's never too late to choose kindness, then please help us share it. A simple click on the like button, a share with someone you love, it sends a ripple of this message out into the world. And if you subscribe, you become part of our family, a community that believes in the power of stories to change us, to heal us, and to remind us of what truly matters. Thank you for being here, for listening with an open heart. We'll see you in the next story.